Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. A pivotal day in this year's World Drivers' Championship. Max Verstappen continues to slice into Oscar Piastri's lead, while Oscar Piastri slices into his teammate Lando Norris. Big drama today at the start of the sprints. Major talk about the repercussions that were faced by Lando Norris, we think, after what happened in Singapore, and whether similar repercussions might be deserving for Oscar after massive controversy as to who was at fault for this first lap incident. The reality is that over the last 3 Grand Prix, Oscar's qualifying has frankly not quite been good enough, and again, in the second part of what happened today, Lando and Max put themselves in prime position to continue to eat into this lead. What are we going to talk about today? Well, there's a lot of it. Hit the like button if you enjoy, subscribe if you're new as always. Let's just dive right in. I'm in a shirt because I've been out this evening, so I've not been able to watch everything exactly live as it happened, so a little bit later video than normal, but I've watched all the replays. We've still got a lot to cover here. So a lot of the talk at the start of the day was repercussions. Again, repercussions. We talked about yesterday some of the theories as to what these could potentially be. Brundle said that it's not a big deal. It might play out in Vegas, which might mean, you know, is it a tow? Is like Lando going to be mandated to give Oscar a tow at some point in the season? I guess time will tell. But with regard to all of this repercussion drama, the most hilarious possible outcome happens right on the very first corner of the race. So let's just talk about it. Here we are in turn 1. This is Max Verstappen leading the Grand Prix. This is Lando Norris unaware that he is about to be sliced out of the race by a flying Oscar Piastri. The two Ferraris nearly come together. Again, so many other cars were kind of caught in the crossfire here. I mean, look at this. We've got almost like 5 wide. This is Austin Turn 1. It's a massive piece of track. There's so much space for the cars. You can take a number of lines, but if you do, you've got to be aware that people taking more conventional lines might be in those positions that you would expect them to be in. We've seen this type of stuff before at Turn 1. But, well, you can see where Oscar is on the track, and let's just talk about how we got there. So, the key point is, both McLarens out of the sprint lap 1 with Max going on to win it. The best possible case scenario for Max. It looks like right now the combination of him and that Red Bull, even in the sprint and sprint qualifying, Max was happy with it, but he wasn't like ultra happy. As it turned out, in qualifying today, and arguably for the race tomorrow, Red Bull may have found something even extra in their car. And Max absolutely seems like the man to beat right now, and we needed, for Max's perspective anyway, to make it a serious championship fight between 3 drivers, to have an event like this. And yeah, it's only a sprint, but an 8-point swing, and there's still 6 more Grand Prix and 2 more sprints. It's a really big deal. Like, this title challenge for Max went from being, I don't know, what did I say a few rounds ago, a 5% chance? I now think Max's chance to win are at least 20%, I think. Maybe it's higher than that. I don't know what you guys think. But the way that things are currently going, Max has got to be very optimistic. So let's just look at this in slow motion. Again, there were a couple of angles I've seen of this from other drivers on board. There was a nice one from George's perspective. As you can see, George on the left-hand side, but that got copyright struck, so I've got to be a little bit careful here. But effectively on the run down to turn 1, Lando's following Max on effectively the racing line, really, for the corner. Oscar's going a little bit wider. And at this point, Oscar has a decision to make. Do we slot in behind Lando and accept third? Or, given Oscar had a better start and wanted to make something happen, do we go for the switchback? Now, initially, everyone watched this and thought, if I play it out in quick mode here, what you'll see is that Hülkenberg hits Oscar, he spins, Alonso gets caught in the crossfire as well. Piastri then goes into Lando, spins him rounds, and it's all over for these guys at the front. So I think the initial perception was that, you know, this might be Hülkenberg's fault, right? Because he went in deep, he was the one that hit Piastri. But if you look at where Hülkenberg is, he's not really doing anything wrong here. He's following the same line that Hamilton's taking, that Lando's taking, that Max is taking ahead of him. Alonso's down the inside, which he's entitled to do. I don't think that Hülkenberg's going in with any kind of reckless abandon here. He's taking some speed in, but he's not doing anything that the other drivers ahead of him aren't doing, right? This does come down to Oscar's decision, right? And you can call this a racing incident. I think that quite possibly it is. But if there is anyone at fault here, it's got to be Piastri. I know there might be a hot take, because on first perceptions here, it looked like, oh, Hülkenberg's got in deep and he's tagged him. But the reality is, Oscar has made the decision to take a line which opens the door to this type of situation, right? So Oscar goes for the switchback here onto Lando. I mean, look where Oscar's car is now, right? Like, he's very much on an incredibly tight line, and if you're going to take that risk and go for that type of switchback, you've got to be more aware. This is COTA turn 1, right? Like, there will always be cars on the inside, and if you're going to make a move like this, you know, you're going to be very lucky to not get hit by somebody on the inside. So Oscar goes for a very, I mean, you can see his car position here. From Russell's onboard, it shows quite clearly how tight Oscar cut back. And look, this was a nice move from Oscar if there wasn't 2 cars on his inside, which there was. And if Oscar didn't do this, if he slotted in behind Lando as he could have done, then I think everyone, at least in front, gets through this corner okay. So that's why I think it's controversial, right? Because, yeah, Oscar gets taken out, it's a racing instant, Lando gets taken out as well. But Lando is out of this sprint because of Oscar's decision, as far as I see it. Now, that's my opinion. You guys may disagree. You may think it's Hülkenberg's fault. You may think it's a racing instant, whatever. But I think that Oscar could have been far more aware in this situation than what he ended up doing. And Lando gets taken out of the race through no fault of his own. As Lando said afterwards, why would you consider repercussions? That's what he was asked, right? He was like, do you expect repercussions now for Oscar? Because it seemed to be his fault, but the initial perception wasn't quite like that, because as Lando says, he got hit, right? So it's not his fault, he got hit by another car. Now, I imagine if Mark Webber was Lando's manager, watching those replays, he would 100% be in the room having the conversations they had after Singapore to say, well, hang on a second, Zach, hang on a second, Andrea. That looked like Oscar's fault to me, so how about we get some repercussions in order? And this is the issue with the Pandora's box that McLaren have opened, that it opens the door to all these type of questions coming up. So Lando says, look, it was bad luck, nothing I could do. The people behind me were trying to be heroes in lap 1, nothing I could do, it was bad luck. So again, that's interesting, the people behind me were trying to be heroes. Again, people look at Hülkenberg, oh, he went in so deep, he was trying to be a hero, but he wasn't really doing anything. Okay, he maybe could have been slightly more careful, or maybe Alonso could have been slightly more careful as well, but you know, you're within your right, I think, to go for those moves, and I actually think Hülkenberg and Alonso were right on the line between being acceptable and being a little bit over it, but I think that's what you're in your right to do. And yeah, when Lando says there were people trying to be heroes, I don't know, is he talking about Oscar? Is he saying, well, Oscar was a bit ambitious there, right, going for the switchback to try and overtake me? It didn't work out. Now, the initial response from McLaren was very much it was Nico's fault, right? So Andrea Stella, look, I guess he's protecting his drivers, but if Stella watches that replay, I think it's tough for him to really argue that this was Hülkenberg's fault, especially the way that he says it. But I don't know, maybe you guys disagree. But he says, we're disappointed we didn't have the possibility. The first corner incident took both cars out. It is surprising that some drivers with a lot of experience don't act with more prudence. So effectively he's saying Alonso and Hülkenberg took way too much risk there. You know, there's a debate there. They took some risk, Hülkenberg and Alonso, sure. I think they took an appropriate amount of risk. I think you can actually argue that the driver who wasn't particularly prudent there was Piastri, right? His own driver. And there was lots of drama about this, of course. Jensen Button commented on it and said, definitely wasn't Lando's fault, right? And, you know, the other drivers had driven into Oscar. And, well, as Jensen says, it was more on Oscar. Lando's not even in the conversation, so he's blaming Oscar, really. Nico Hülkenberg comes out and says, look, I saw the replay of Oscar. He turned in pretty aggressively, wanting to get the undercut, but I can't just disappear. I had Fernando inside me, and I couldn't see him anymore. So I get that from Hülkenberg's side as well. Now, Zak Brown is probably the most interesting character in all of this, because he came out and said, neither of our drivers are to blame. Some amateur hour driving. Clearly, Nico drove into Oscar, he had no business being where he was. That was the initial reaction from Zak Brown. And again, if you're a McLaren CEO, you're going to have McLaren blinkers on, aren't you? Right? You are going to look at things initially with the benefit of the doubt for your own drivers. What's very fascinating is that a couple of hours later, Zak totally changed his tune and said this, I've reviewed it, I think I've changed my view. I can't really put that on Nico. Now, of course, he doesn't go as far to say that it was Oscar's fault, but his initial take was, oh, amateur hour driving, Hülkenberg was at fault, and then Zak Brown's now saying, well, wasn't really Nico's fault on review, so whose fault was it, right? It's obviously someone's fault. You could argue just a racing instance, and fair enough. I mean, the stewards probably would have looked at it that way. Again, it's lap 1, turn 1. Is it different to Singapore? Yes, the context of the crashes are quite different, but fundamentally, is it quite similar? Maybe. Piastri also out of the race, so from his perspective, it's not like he was going to get punished more. The guy who was harshly done by here really was Lando, right? Because he did nothing wrong at all and ended up out of the race when there was some serious points up for grabs against Piastri today. So he says it's not on Nico, lots of incidents at turn 1. In the heat of the moment, I was pretty bothered, but he backs off Zach Brown of saying that it was Nico Hülkenberg's fault. So, yeah, fascinated to hear your thoughts in the comments below. This was Fernando Alonso's story on it. He says, this year's luck me to flatline recharging for 2026, because I think Fernando made a reasonable attempt here. But, yeah, it did not go to plan. It's code to turn 1. There's always going to be some chaos. Now, some drivers, though, did have some better luck. This was Lewis Hamilton. There's a bit of carbon fibre flying off the cars in front. And had it not been for the halo, this piece of carbon fibre would have gone straight to Hamilton's helmet. The helmet would have probably done its job, but, you know, that's another incident, right? So there was some bad luck some places, there was some good luck in other places. Obviously, we know how much the halo has done for Formula 1. There's also this pretty funny moment here. So that Oscar tried to limp on, right? But he eventually had to retire. And this was Hülkenberg's front wing flying past, stuck in Yuki's floor, which was pretty funny. The rest of the sprint was pretty entertaining. The safety car eventually ends, and Russell goes for an absolute mega send on Max. He thought this was his moment, and he went for it. And look, Max has gone for these moves before, and I think, like, this move was definitely over the line. At the end of the day, he went off the track, Max went off the track, Max stayed ahead. It is what it is, right? I think it is racing, right? And I do commend George going for it in the same way that I would commend any driver going for such an attempt. We've seen Max do it before as well, and lots of drama at this corner over the years. So hopefully a little bit of a preview of 2026's title fight. If there is, you know, I would like to see Russell and Verstappen battle for a world title at some point. I'll just put it that way. But yeah, Russell goes for the gig ascend. It doesn't quite work out. And we also, I think Leclerc made a mistake. Hamilton got the move done on him. We had Behrman get into an incident as well. But this was the main one. I don't know what this guy Lance Stroll was thinking about, but this is a pretty hilarious attempted overtake. He goes for a big send down the inside of turn 1 and, you know, hits the lockup, crashes Ocon out of the race. It is what it is. You got strolled. Unlucky. Max Verstappen strolls to the finish line and wins with a solid 8 points. Russell seconds. Sainz was in great position to capitalise and ended up in third. Then the two Ferraris. Albon, Yuki picks up a couple of points despite getting Hülkenberg's front wing stuck in his floor. Antonelli with the final point after the penalty for Behrman. That then put the driver standings like this. So all of a sudden, right, Verstappen over the last 4 Grand Prix or something has now, and I know there's still a Grand Prix to come tomorrow, he has outscored both McLaren drivers combined over the last handful of Grand Prix. And that is a stat that if he continues, he will win this title. He's currently closing on Piastri at the rate of like 12 points a weekend or something. And he only needs to close by 9 points a weekend on Piastri and about 5.5 points a weekend on Norris to win the title. If Max wins every race and Norris is second every race and Piastri is third every race, Max is your world champion this year. So, you know, just to put that out there, right? And it's not far away from if Oscar is second and Max is first, then it's still possible as well. So all of a sudden, the gap is now 55 points. And 55 points sounds, I'm not going to lie, kind of doable. When it was 90, when it was 80, 70, even when it was like 63, 65, it felt like, well, that's quite of a lot, right? But now it's 55, he's gaining 12 points a rounds. You know, Max certainly isn't the favourite for the title. It's still a big points delta. One issue, you know, could well spell the ends. But it's absolutely possible now. And it's possible to such an extent that there is an argument, and I'm sure that Mark Webber will be making such an argument, that McLaren should favour Piastri to ensure that they secure both titles. I don't think there's any world where they're going to do that, because that's not the way that they've approached things so far. But also, in my opinion, because Piastri's just, you know, he's not quite been at it, has he, the last few races, right? He's been a little bit off where he certainly was in his excellent stint, and it does feel a little bit like with the pressure rising, as you would expect, right? No one is immune to this. Max was not immune to this in 2021. Lando wasn't immune to this last year at all. Yeah, you consider Oscar Piastri the Iceman or whatever, he's a cool head, and yeah, it does certainly seem that way outside of the car. But any driver, Max is hunting you down. There's a lot of media scrutiny. There's a lot of pressure on you right now. And yeah, Piastri's still a cool head outside of the car. But in the car, you know, his performances, I mean, Baku, obviously, a great example. Singapore, Lando got the better of him, turn 1, and then lap 1. And even though Lando was carrying damage, Oscar couldn't get him back. And, you know, now today, again, in qualifying, Piastri was just a little bit off the pace, right? We see how everything transpired here in Q1. Hadjar was out because unfortunately he crashed. Albon was out as well. That was a pretty big loss for the Williams team. Stroll, who's shocked, Bortoletto, Ocon. Yuki does make it into Q2, but then he goes out. And again, he got into some drama with Liam Lawson, which is no real surprise. But I do think it's very interesting because Lawson is very much aware that he probably will keep that Racingville seat next season, but Yuki could get it instead. Lawson is fighting Yuki a lot of the time like his career depends on it, and as well he might, because it may well do. So Yuki believed that Lawson was effectively disrupting his qualifying lap. Yuki eventually goes out in 13th. Colapinto, Gasly, Lawson, Hulkenberg, the other drivers to go out. Again, great job from Behrman to get into Q3. Like, you've got to respect this guy, man. He's done such a stellar job this season. And fair play to Ferrari. They actually had a car that was starting to look a little bit racy. This is what I like about, okay, sprint, then there's Parc Ferme. The McLarens had to rebuild their cars, but Parc Ferme reopened, so it opens the door for Ferrari to actually make a couple of changes and actually improve their car. They took a serious step forwards from what happened in the sprint qualifying yesterday. But again, it was always really going to be Max's pole position here. No one ever really looked like challenging him. If Lando put together everything at once, then it was possible for the McLaren. But it just seems like Max and this Red Bull, they keep making strides. And to be honest, around this circuit, I was kind of always expecting Max to be on pole anyway. But the margin in which he managed it was very impressive. This was Charles Leclerc having a spin on his first run, but he did a great job, Leclerc, on his second run to eventually end up third. So it was super tight at the front. Max didn't even get a second run in, but a 1:32.5 was good enough for pole. Lando just pipped Leclerc to second, but nearly 3/10 off Max. As we're going to see in a second though, actually I'll just share it for you guys now, these were the optimal qualifying times. The fastest possible lap based on the best sectors that any driver did was actually Lando's. It would have been a 1:32.4, so he didn't quite hook it up. Remarkably enough, Piastri's best sectors were a lap time 6 whole tenths slower than where Lando was. Look, maybe the car rebuild wasn't perfect, I don't know, but we know that Piastri's he's been 3/10 off the pace, right, and he was again in qualifying. Now, yesterday, 3/10 of Lando was good enough for third. Today, 3/10 of Lando was only good enough for sixth, and that's very important when it comes to the championship. Hamilton would have been third in this hypothetical optimal lap time scenario. But what actually happened was this. So Russell, I mean, it was so tight, wasn't it, for third? Russell just gets pipped out for fourth. So it's Verstappen, Norris, Leclerc, Russell, Hamilton, and then Piastri. So as I was saying yesterday, the gap where Hulkenberg found himself yesterday, the Mercedes made a couple of strides, the Ferrari made a couple of strides, and that means that Oscar's underwhelming performance so far this weekend came back to bite him in qualifying, right? And he ended up sixth. So all of a sudden, this championship is getting incredibly tasty because you've got drama at McLaren, you've got the repercussions for Lando, maybe repercussions for Piastri, who knows what Lando's team might argue over the coming days. But it's very clear that McLaren are tripping over themselves now, and the pressure that Max is putting on their drivers is absolutely paying off, right? Max is a Terminator, and the pressure is seemingly getting to Oscar to at least a certain extent. Whether you think that there's any, we're seeing any, let's say, results from that on the track, I think you could argue we quite possibly are. This title is very much alive, and if tomorrow's Grand Prix, if Max were to win it, Piastri, I think, has got a difficult battle making his way through, but it's absolutely possible that the McLarens can come through anyway. They still have a phenomenal car, as we know, and assuming they don't go out in turn one, then presumably it's absolutely on the cards. but they could go out turn one. Who knows if history repeats itself? So very much interested in your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.